All right, welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. We have a very interesting show. I think you're going to find it interesting. I hope you're going to find it interesting. Planned for you today. I guess it was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. That was the last time we were on air before we took a break, and we talked about this reporting from Emerald Robinson about how the 2024 election was saved. And that reporting has continued. In the midst of us covering all of her tweets, this massive tweet storm, I was trying to remember the name that I now know is Dr. Andrew Paquette, because we did an interview a year ago where he seemed to indicate something similar that corroborates Emerald Robinson's reporting, specifically that Elon Musk was made aware of the insecurities in our election, and that there was that information was then used to somehow secure the 2024 election, as opposed to what we all saw in the 2020 election. The hits just keep on coming. We're going to talk about that and really everything it encompasses today on the Paul Harrell program, which starts right now.
The Paul Harrell Program.
All right, folks, I want to remind everybody, wherever you're watching, whatever platform you're on, we're on X America News or YouTube or Facebook or Rumble or wherever it is, just please like the video, subscribe to the channel, or retweet it, or just do all of the things for us. We would really appreciate that. We would very much appreciate that. Let's get right to it. Our guest for today is Dr. Andrew Paquette, and he's back with us. Andrew, it's so great to have you back on the program. Thank you so much for your time.
Not a problem. It's fun. I enjoyed the last interview.
Well, I really appreciate it. I mean, at the time of the last interview, we had just come off, the 2024 election where Donald Trump won, winning all 7 swing states. And at the time, we were asking, how exactly did this happen? Because everybody seemed to be planning for disappointment, planning that, there was going to be another steal. You even talked about, because I went back and I watched our interview. This is what's interesting is I could not, and I was looking in my email, Andrew, trying to remember our interview, figure it out who you were exactly, because I have a terrible memory, and I guess I'm not really good at my job because a journalist should remember who they interview. And then over the weekend, you retweeted the old interview that was up on X, and I was like, there he is. And so I reached out to get you scheduled. But one of the things you said at the time was that, there were plans in place on the ground, to go ahead and do the influx of ballots at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, but for whatever reason, that didn't happen. Let me just give you a broad question to start things off. What have you learned? It's been a year since we spoke. Emerald Robinson now has these groundbreaking reporting. Have you learned anything new between today and a year ago?
Well, I have. Unfortunately, I can't say a lot, but let's just say I've informally had some of that stuff corroborated. Okay, so the way I look at this, the research I've done is complementary to the type of research that Emerald was reporting on, and that CIA informant she has was talking about, and I've already forgotten his name again. Greg.
I think what we said, it was Berenson, and he's former CIA section chief, I believe.
Right, and he had a number of whistleblowers, and the thing is, what they're talking about voter machines, meaning the tabulators for the most part. And what I'm looking at is the voter rolls, and those are completely separate. However, they actually can work pretty well together depending on how you have organized your methodology. So while we're working on separate tracks, and really I don't see a whole lot of crossover where people who are looking at the tabulation end of this are looking at the voter roll end of it and vice versa. And I can say for myself, I don't have any access to tabulators. But nevertheless, it's undeniable that they're complementary, because the thing is that when you manipulate voter rolls, you're creating opportunities to have genuine ballots produced for fraudulent reasons, right? So a person who should not have a ballot is getting one, and it's a real ballot that can't be distinguished from a fake one. Well, because it is real, it's not fake, but it's obtained fraudulently, so it's not something that can be used legally. And then on the other end, what they're doing is they're able to adjust the count. Now, I've been long curious why you would use both methods at the same time, because if you manipulate the rolls and you get, let's just say, an extra 500,000 ballots fraudulently, and you cast those, I would expect you'd want the tabulators to count those accurately. You wouldn't want to have the tabulators add another 500,000 on top of that, because then it would look really obvious and probably would exceed the population of the target region, right? But then when I looked at the states, I realized that it's quite possible they used both methods, but not at the same time or in the same place or in the same proportions. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Patrick Byrne, who is also, being reported with Emerald Robinson is reporting that, he was an integral part of this this operation to essentially disrupt these, Venezuelan Gang of the Sun operation where, they had these computers in Serbia. One of the things he said is that there are 14 or 15 different ways that they have options on the table, pieces basically on a chessboard, and they can, use a little bit here, use this method here, use that method here to accomplish the results, which is, I would imagine makes that very difficult to audit if you've got many different potential problems.
I think part of the reason they would have those different methods, actually, I think the major reason is not to prevent auditability, although obviously they would want that. I would assume that most of those methods, if not all of them, prevent auditability. From what I've seen anyway, the overarching goal in having those multiple methods is to deal with the different conditions on the ground in each of the places where they want to implement them. So certain states are going to be more, shall we say, friendly to the fraud than other states. And based on what I'm seeing, I would say New York has got to be the friendliest of them all. New York is basically the Tim Waltz of election fraud. At least that's how it looks to me, and it's based on the voter rolls. But on the other hand, I would say Kansas is not very friendly to it, and same thing goes for Oklahoma. And if I wanted to look at Texas and Ohio, I would say certain counties in those places are compromised, but not the entire state. So because you have these varying conditions in different places, and probably have a mix of crooked versus not crooked administrators and officials working in each of these places, certain methods will work and others won't. So the methods that give them the best cover are the kind of methods I see used in New York. And those would make it almost, how should I say this? The tabulator fraud would be less necessary in a place like New York, and it would be much more necessary in a place like Pennsylvania or Oklahoma or Texas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Can you refresh the audience before we kind of get into some of the new details? Refresh the audience, as a statistician and you're an expert in these algorithms. Just kind of try to give us a 30,000-foot view of these algorithms that you have discovered in several states. I know last time you were on the show, you were talking about basically these phantom voter rolls, or these clones or ghost voters, if you will. Can you just kind of give us a refresher on all of that?
Yeah, I can talk you through it. I can actually also show it, but let me do the talking part first. So I have now looked at, I actually forget how many states, but I think it's more than 12, but not more than 13, so it's one or the other. And out of these states, I've found algorithms associated with ID numbers in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio, Texas, Arizona, Georgia, California, and did I say Pennsylvania? Pennsylvania. There's a few states I looked at where I didn't find them, like Kansas and Oklahoma. It doesn't mean they're not there, but I didn't find them, so I'm not going to claim they are. Now, the thing that's important about this is that in almost any kind of modern computer-mediated fraud, it involves the ID numbers. And generally, it involves creating fake ID numbers or fake people that have real ID numbers attached to them. So if you're looking for any kind of consumer fraud, for instance, in the insurance or banking industries, the first thing you're going to want to check are the ID numbers. Do they make sense? Do you have any anomalies in the ID number list? So I'm looking at these ID numbers and I'm finding algorithms all over the place. Not literally in every state, but enough that I would consider it to be a really widespread problem. And you wonder, okay, so what do they accomplish with these algorithms and with the ID numbers? Okay, so first the ID number. The ID number, let's just say I'm a real person, right? Andrew Paquette. So I have a genuine voter ID number here in New York. But let's say someone uses my identity to create a fake ID number in Ohio. So then there's going to be an Andrew Paquette there that doesn't exist, that's based on my information and my birth date and perhaps associated with an Ohio address that has a unique Ohio voter registration number. So now you've got a ballot that can be generated in that name and voted. So at that point, the trick is either to get that ballot in the hands of someone who can physically bring it to the counting room, or you just print them off and bring them to the counting room after everyone's left, and then you go ahead and run them through your tabulator. There's a few other permutations of that, but the idea is a fake registration or a fraudulent registration has to have an ID number, and that is going to allow that record to generate ballots, whether or not they ever go to a real person. And that's actually another thing, is that they don't actually have to be voted by a real person. And this is where the tabulators can come in handy, okay? So let's just say I happen to know of a name, anyway, that's associated with 11 records in Brooklyn, New York. And I happen to know that all 11 are fake, and it's what's called a synthetic identity. So the name is a real name, and the address is a real address, but the name and the address don't belong together. So when this guy was canvassed, the owner of the house said that he'd been there for 20 years and nobody of the name of that voter had ever lived there, even though that voter had supposedly just registered in 2020. So all 11 of those records were fake. So how would you vote those, right? So for instance, if all 11 records had a request for absentee ballots going to that address, what would have happened is that homeowner would have received 11 ballots in the name of someone he didn't recognize. And when the canvasser asked him, did you receive any ballots in this name? He would have said yes instead of no, which is what he actually said. So what is the value of it? Well, the value of something like that is that if you also control the tabulators, what you can do is you can set the tabulators to count these fake votes without ever creating a genuine ballot. And then you can record in the voter rolls that the person voted. Does that make sense?
It makes incredible sense. Essentially,
okay. So
in layman's terms,
no,
I mean, I'm just saying, basically, they're creating NPCs.
Yeah, yeah. Now, the other thing you can do is, and I wouldn't be surprised if this happened as well. And by the way, I don't know what was actually done. All I know is what I see in the records. And those records, give me some things I can say for certain, and other things I'm hypothesizing based on the evidence I've seen. Okay. But it also wouldn't surprise me if in some places they went ahead and they collected those ballots in a central location. For instance, I have one person in New York's voter rolls who has 25 records. He's also a fictitious identity that doesn't exist. And all of the registration records that I was able to see, I wasn't able to see them all, but the ones I did see, all of them directed that a absentee ballot be generated and sent to a PO box in I forgot the name of the city, Nanuet, New York. And it was a rental mailbox. So what would have happened is 25 mail-in ballots would have been sent to this mail-in address, and someone could then go to that mailbox and collect those 25 ballots and use them. And in this particular case, every single one of the registrations was in a different county. So the only practical use for those would be in a federal election, because otherwise it's only one vote being added to each of multiple counties instead of 25 votes being added to a federal election. And at that level, even 25 votes isn't much, which is why it kind of makes sense that I found about 1.5 million of these illegal records that some attorneys call modified duplicates, because what they are is it's like a duplicate of a record where they get their own ID number. But the question of whether they generate ballots or not, I can't really be sure, but I can tell you that the fraud would work either way. They either generate the ballot and then get it into the hands of somebody who fraudulently votes with it, or they don't, and then they make sure that the tabulator counts the non-existent ballot. And then you have a way to synchronize the tabulator count with the voter roll voters who voted count. Make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. One question. When you go in and you find these algorithms, and you'll have to, excuse me again, I'm not a computer guy or a technical guy, but do you ever come across algorithms that are the same? They may be functionally the same.
Oh,
or are they different from state to state?
Yeah, and I never even told you what the algorithms were,
Yeah.
which I should have done. I feel very bad about that. Sorry. May I share my screen?
I don't believe this. My software's not going to allow it. I apologize.
Okay. That's okay. Actually, now that I think of it, it's probably better anyway because I haven't anonymized the data.
Okay.
So in New York, they have there are 4 algorithms. Now, the one that I fully solved, I call the spiral algorithm because of its mathematical structure. But basically, it's an extraordinarily complex mapping algorithm. A mapping algorithm is basically like a marriage planner or a marriage advisor. It says, you, George, you marry Harriet over there, and Martha, you have to marry Walter. Okay, so it's deciding who gets married to whom. And it's what it's marrying are the county ID numbers with the state ID numbers. Okay. Now, what it does is it imposes structure, and that structure is information in itself, right? So it's kind of like if you want to have a secret message in a book, you can ensure that you use certain words in a certain order, so that if you tell someone to highlight every 6th word or something, it'll have a secret message. Okay, so you basically would write it out in the normal way, and then you'd look for opportunities to adjust the words so that you could insert the secret message, and then you would adjust it accordingly. So they did something like that with the voter roll ID numbers by mapping the county to the state ID numbers the way they did. So it involves something called rep units, which are numbers that are made of the digit 1. So it's 1, 11, 111, 1,111, 11,111, et cetera. And so what they do is they divide all of the numbers in a certain region of the number space that's used, which, by the way, is all by itself really well hidden within the database. They cut it up into all these rep unit segments, and then they divide those and shift their position, kind of like they're manipulating the rollers on a slot machine, and then they put them all back together again. And at that point, they look random. But if you understand the structure, which I do because I studied it for 2 solid years, you can actually extract information from it. So, for instance, they deleted about 500,000 records, and those records appear as, or rather, don't appear, but they're missing numbers from the ID sequence that the algorithm tells me to expect. But the thing is, the algorithm also tells me what the county ID numbers are that correspond to those. And when I check different snapshots, I see that these missing records are all modified duplicates that have been deleted. So that's about 500,000 illegal records that once were in the system that you now can't detect. And I can reconstitute all of those records. I can bring back the full name and address, and if they have the phone number, I can bring back the phone number. I can bring back all the personal information from all these deleted records just because I solved the algorithm. So that's actual real content, real data that's embedded in a secret number. And that's really not something that should be possible. You don't want secret fields in public data. It has a tendency to look opaque rather than transparent. So that's one algorithm. There's 3 others in New York. One of them, which I call the shingle, creates a very distinctive graphic pattern, basically like a painting that's quite unique. Okay, it's nowhere as artistic as a Mona Lisa, but for computer art, it's still something quite distinctive. And all of those records are suspicious for a variety of reasons. But one of them is that there are more of these illegal modified duplicate records in that collection of numbers than anywhere else in the database. On top of which, 100% of them are purged. But if you look at the registration versus the purge dates, they look like they were created to be purged. That is to say that the moment they were made, they were purged. And that kind of makes them look like standby registrations to be activated when needed, as opposed to genuine registrations. And before I go to the next algorithm, does that all make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Explain the next one, and then I do have a question.
Okay. So I then looked in other states. The next state I found an algorithm in, actually two, was in New Jersey. And like New York, it had a kind of a sandwich shape to it, where the first group of numbers they looked really random, and then you had this high level of structure in the middle, and then at the end they look random again. And by the way, the advantage of a structure like that, which they also used in New York and other states, is that if anyone is suspicious of the records, if they think there might be an algorithm, and most people before my research probably wouldn't even be thinking of this, but if they were, they'd be going through like a million and a half, 500,000 records, and they'd see absolutely nothing. It'd look like absolute gibberish. And then they'd hit the numbers that suddenly had a very rigorous structure applied to them. But they'd be bored and tired before they ever got to those. So the likelihood of them ever being found is absolutely nothing. Or not nothing, obviously, because I found them, but it's very low. So anyway, so New Jersey used two totally different algorithms from New York. Ohio had an algorithm that was used in 3 counties out of 88, but the algorithm in Texas that I found in one county, their biggest, actually Harris County, just as the Ohio counties that used it were also their biggest counties. That algorithm looks like it's based on the Ohio algorithm. And I say based on because it's got one thing that looks exactly the same. And in fact, if you look at graphic representations of the algorithm, it looks exactly the same, except reversed. And but then they added an extra level of detail. That one is based on what's called modular math. So it uses a modulo 8 base frequency, and then it has a modulo 99 sublimated underneath that, which is kind of a complicated thing to do mathematically. And then let's see, Arizona's patterns look similar to New York's. They have one that looks like it's a modified version of New York's shingle. So it's not the same. It looks more sophisticated than the one in New York, but it does look like it's operating on the same basic principle. And they have another one that I can't distinguish from a pattern in New York that I call the tartan. So I'm assuming for the time being it is the same algorithm. I mean, literally identical, but it's a complicated one, and I haven't. How shall I say this? I can't differentiate them yet. I think that's about as far as I can go. They're similar enough that I think they could be identical, but I haven't gone far enough to say for sure that they are. Is that fair?
That is fair. This is, it's just blowing my mind that this is. It's like our worst fears are realized. That we've all suspected it. We've all seen the results of it, and especially. And I've been saying this for a while. I know you're talking about the algorithms, but then you add the voting machines. You add the rise of AI. It just makes absolutely no sense why we would ever continue down this path, relying on technology as if it's somehow going to make these elections more reliable. I think at this point that is an insane position to take. You say you've been studying some of these algorithms for 2 years. Is that right?
Well, I started studying. Well, the first one I found was in New York, and I found it in April of 2022. So I've been studying algorithms at one level or another since then. But it took 2 years to solve the spiral in New York.
Wow.
It takes less time to find them. And by the way, I never got around to telling you why these things are useful to people. Okay, I told you why the fake registrations are useful to people, but not why the algorithms are useful. The reason is the algorithms can be used, number one, to tag which records are useful to the bad guys in such a way that they can reliably identify them for use so that they don't accidentally manipulate a real person's records, which could prompt a complaint of some kind and discovery of what they're doing. The other thing is they can embed quite a lot of information in them. So the way I like to describe them is that they allow, first off, the algorithms are covert. They are very, very well hidden. Okay. Secondly, they create the equivalent of a hidden data channel. So what that channel contains, what kind of information, I'm not sure. But the fact that it's there is a huge security risk all by itself. And actually, one thing I didn't get around to telling you, the pattern in Wisconsin is an absolute doozy. It's more complicated than the one in New York. It's a really, really complicated one, and it kind of doesn't surprise me that Wisconsin has per capita about the same number of modified duplicate illegal records that New York does. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. And so my next question, I'm glad you went over that about what's useful, how this is useful. So my next question is, what did you do with this information, and what have you done with this information? If you can speak to that.
Yeah, I can say some of the things. It's actually kind of complicated. It's interesting when I found the first one, the spiral, and then a colleague pointed out. Actually, it was a colleague who pointed out the shingle to me. But after I found the spiral, I wrote a paper on it, and I was supposed to be presenting this all over the place. And then suddenly all of those presentations essentially got canceled. It did get published in a peer-reviewed journal, and I think it was 10 million views in 48 hours on that, but then nothing. I heard nothing about it, and no one was contacting me until about a year later, and this is after my New Jersey paper was published. No, it wasn't. It was just before that, when Jerome Corsi contacted me. And he told me, he investigated this, and he told me that that information about my algorithm findings had actually been suppressed, that there were people that were interfering with that information coming out somehow. And anyway, so he encouraged me to publish the New Jersey paper, which had been sitting on my computer for something like 7 or 8 months. And so I sent it in, and it was published. And then I went ahead and I did the next 4 papers, all of which are also published in peer-reviewed journals. Now, as far as what did I do, I presented these to various law enforcement representatives. So I've presented them to sheriffs and district attorneys. I presented them in a meeting with other members of a group called New York Citizens Audit at the Special Investigations Unit of the State Police in Albany, in New York. And I made a presentation to the legislature that was very poorly attended. I think 2 assistants were sent for a Republican legislature later, and that was it. But the funny thing is that all these officials, they had a tendency to, how shall I say this? Most of them were really horrified. Okay, the people in the Special Investigations Unit team were really frightened. They basically went white as a ghost. They said, this tells us right away that the elections were not just compromised, but compromised at a fundamental level. That is, it is essentially a total loss of control of our election, is what this represents. And I mean, they understood perfectly well what the harm was that this represented. And another guy who is he was a county commissioner. He said, look, I think he said there are 124 county commissioners in New York State, right? Because there's 62 counties, and there's 2 for each county, 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. And he said, of the whole 124, and I know all of them, he said, I'm the only one who's actually a programmer. And I understand this, and I can see this is extremely devastatingly dangerous. But if you try to explain this to any of the rest, even if they're honest, well-meaning folks, they're not going to understand what this means. But he says, but he could tell that it meant somebody had control of the voter rolls. Let's see, what else have I gotten? Thanks to Dr. Corsi, I actually met quite a few people who are fairly prominent, and I haven't talked to them about mentioning their names in public, so I'm not going to, but let's just say one of these guys I had just seen on Fox News, and an hour later I was talking to him. And some of these guys, yeah, go ahead.
The reason I bring it up is just because when we were on a year ago, we were asking, how did it happen? How did Trump win this time? Obviously, conventional logic would just say, well, I mean, he survived an assassination, and, it was just too big to rig and everything else. But with what you're describing, that really wouldn't matter. Or maybe it could, I suppose. But one of the things you said in that interview is one of the key components to what Emerald Robinson is now reporting. She is now reporting that weeks before the election, There was, a presentation made. There was data there. Elon Musk got involved, was skeptical at first. Then he said, no, it's real. We've got a problem. Then he immediately went to a rally in Pennsylvania where he started trashing Dominion voting machines. Again, I know you're on the algorithm side, but like you said, it's a symbiotic relationship. So I'm just wondering if any of your data has ever made it into the hands, or did it make it into the hands of Musk, and eventually that meeting at Mar-a-Lago where Susie Wiles was briefed, and then eventually President Trump was briefed?
Okay, I'm going to have to be careful how I answer this, but let's just say I know for a fact that my research has on at least 2 occasions made it all the way to the top. Okay. As far as whether it influenced the specific research that Emerald Robinson is talking about, I don't know. But I do know that my research is not being ignored. It's considered to be part of the problem. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely it does. And so for that, if this is actually an optimistic development, if if the action, what Emerald Robinson is reporting, that this was basically, there was an attempt to steal, but it was essentially, there was a counteroffensive to make sure it didn't happen. It makes a lot of sense. You've got Trump now saying, hey, get rid of the filibuster. We've got to reform our elections. They're not going to get rid of the filibuster, though, right? And so if we want to secure our elections, we're going to have to continue to be vocal, but eventually somebody's going to have to act on this. And I actually think people have to go to jail. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well. But you retweeted or reposted this from a person on X, the Lone Raccoon, who wrote, I'm going to take a deep breath and assume this is a mistranslation. He's reacting to the leading report saying, breaking, President Trump demands every Republican governor require paper ballots for secure elections. Okay, which is great. There have been a few counties in my home state of Arkansas that have done it as well. Colonel Conrad Reynolds has been integral in that movement, and then he was indicted. So, he got charged with electioneering because he was within 25 feet conducting an exit poll too close to a polling station. They say he's the only guy that's ever been charged with that crime. We had him on. We talked about it, but I digress. The Lone Raccoon goes on. First, it must be all states. We have too many red states with suspiciously elected blue governors. Secondly, it's not the paper. Primarily, it's the computers that scan and interpret the paper. Ballot marking devices with no paper are actually rare. He says we need an executive order banning computerized vote counting and no excuse absentee voting and early voting. Now, you retweeted that and said, I think this is a mistranslation. From what I'm hearing, our government understands the problem. Can you elaborate any on that more, Dr. Andrew Paquette, on how our government understands this problem?
Well, a little bit. But first I want to say something. The Lone Raccoon is a researcher named Jeff O'Donnell, located in Florida, who's done a tremendous amount of really good research down there. And he's one of the few people who's, as I understand it, looked at the inside of a Dominion machine. Okay. So he knows very well what's going on there. And what he said is true. It's not so much that you have paper ballots, it's that you're hand counting the ballots instead of using a machine, because the ballots you put in the machine are paper, right? But as far as the government understanding the problem, first off, there are some things that are public domain that are pretty easy to talk about. I've been collecting these for the last couple of months, but President Trump issued an executive order in March of this year regarding election integrity. And shortly thereafter, he tasked Harmeet Dillon and her deputy, a woman named Maureen Riordan, with investigating various states' election-related activities. And they shortly thereafter went ahead and sent out a flurry of official DOJ letterhead letters to various secretaries of state across the country demanding access to their voter rolls, and also telling them, like, for instance, in Wisconsin's case, they told them, you are out of compliance with HAVA, which I completely agree with. HAVA is the Help America Vote Act. It's a federal election law. And because they're out of compliance, the letter warned that they're about to lose their money that goes with that law, which I think amounted to $70 odd million. So it's not chump change. Some states have actually already been sued, as I understand it. I'm not sure which ones, because some were sued, some were warned that they're about to be sued, and some were told if you don't do this, you will be sued. So there's a variety of different letters went out to a number of different states. So that's going on right now. And I see these things hit the news sometimes, but if you look, you're going to find that they're happening more often than they're being reported. So that's a full court press. And then I know other election researchers, and we're all basically hearing the same rumblings that, people are seeking out our advice more. I just got a call today from someone who was asking about this. And I'm seeing, I can't really go too far, I'm sorry. I'm just seeing there's a lot of activity going on at a lot of different levels. I do not think for a minute that anyone in the Trump administration wants to let this drop. They know how important it is. And they intend to fully pursue this. So I think that the level of success in this case is going to be less about how determined the Trump administration is towards finding out what the honest truth is about what happens in our elections than it is about how successful the defense is going to be on the other side trying to protect corrupt practices. And obviously there is a lot of defense for that. There are people, like, for instance, some states, I want to say Michigan is one of them, but maybe it was Minnesota. Anyway, some of them have actually refused the requests for records, even though they're public records. I mean, I think if I recall correctly, I read about one of these states had refused the DOJ request, said, we're not giving you our records. And I'm sitting here with them sitting on my computer. I actually had the records that the DOJ was asking for. And it's because, as a member of the public, I'm entitled to see those. So why on earth are these guys saying, no, the DOJ can't look at them? That's very, very peculiar behavior. And the fact that they're willing to defend that tells me that they have a lot to hide. And of course, my research tells me they absolutely have a lot to hide, because, in addition to all of these algorithms that I find, which on their own are very suspicious, I am also finding quite a lot of these modified duplicates, which are individually illegal. And I think they could make a case that each one of them represents a case of identity theft. And identity theft comes with some pretty severe penalties. So, and actually, I went through the law to see how many laws they broke and what the penalties were. And basically, in New York alone, again, I'm not a lawyer here, but based on my understanding of the law, there were over 1 million felonies connected to this in New York alone. So if the people involved were ever charged with this, none of them would ever get out of jail. They'd be in for the rest of their lives. Period. That's it. Because every one of these is.
This is an incredible story. I mean, it's the story. It's the greatest conspiracy. If true, it's the greatest conspiracy in American history by far, because it essentially means that we're slaves, that we've been treated as such, and that we've walked around thinking that our vote matters, but it really hasn't. According to, again, Emerald Robinson's reporting, Venezuela is kind of the linchpin in all of this. The cartel of the sun is the linchpin in all of this. Those were the people associated with them that wrote the software that went on the machines. You're the algorithm expert finding everything that's going on. Have you, within the voter rolls? So, is there any way to find out who wrote the software that created the algorithms? I would love to know the answer to that question, but you just reminded me of something I would like to mention. When the Emerald Robinson report came out and the video it was based on was released by, was it Laura Loomer who did that? I think it was Loomer. No, Laura. There was I think you're talking about. Well, what I saw was Laura Logan.
Laura Logan.
Yeah.
Laura Logan. Yeah, that's it. So when that came out, one thing kind of struck me as resonant with my research, and that was the date 2004, because that was the date that one of these Venezuelan coders landed in Florida, again, if I'm remembering this correctly, and started creating election system software in America. And the reason that date resonates with me is that I found that none of the algorithms in any of the states I've studied date back to before 2004. Okay. Now, I was linking that to the introduction of the HAVA Act, but the thing is that the two things could actually be related. The reason is that the Help America Vote Act required that states switch to electronic voter rolls. And that was the perfect opportunity, particularly in combination with Patriot Act and other things that were going on at the same time, to basically set up a system designed to, shall we say, in an emergency, control an election. And maybe when they did it, they didn't intend to control elections. They just wanted to have the capacity. I don't know. But the thing is, that guy's arrival at about exactly the same time, slightly ahead of the earliest algorithms I saw, but not by a whole lot, made it very plausible to me as an explanation that maybe these things were in fact coordinated, and it would make sense to coordinate them.
So, I mean, that's in a way. I mean, you're tying with what you just said there. If that is true, again, I mean, what a coincidence. But what you're doing is you're tying the algorithm problem to Venezuela, or to a Venezuelan national.
It's a possibility, yeah. There are some things I can say definitely, and other things are more hypothesis. But what I can say is, in the states that I've studied anyway, whatever it is that I wrote in my reports represents what I actually found in those voter rolls. And what I just told you is also true. I haven't found any algorithms that were inserted earlier than 2004, and that coincides with this date that the Laura Logan's guest gave. So that's true. Okay, whether it's connected or not is a different story. Wow. But maybe not. It might be the same story, which kind of makes sense. One thing I find when you investigate things is that if you're on the wrong track, the possibilities just never line up. And if you're on the right track, they just keep on lining up no matter what you do.
The truth is like that.
Yeah, and so when I'm looking at this stuff, especially with the algorithms, one thing I don't like is an algorithm that doesn't behave as expected. So if you determine it's going to do X, Y, and Z, and it does X, A, B, and Z instead, in my opinion, you don't understand the algorithm, or there isn't one, right? But if it always gives you X, Y, Z every single time, then you've identified it correctly. Okay, this is how, for instance, or why I have a lot of confidence in the one I found in Wisconsin and some of these other places. So when I try to double check these things, like for instance, there are a number of people in New York that have more than 10 records apiece. Okay, and we were able to, or not we, but the New York Citizens Audit was able to canvass 3 of those names, and every single one of them was, as far as they could tell, synthetic. That is to say, a non-existent person. And collectively, there's 25, 21, and 11 records each for those 3 individuals. But there are dozens of people like that in New York. Now, based on that, I would say that every time I see somebody with more than 10 registrations and they're registered on the same day, which is also the truth with these guys, within the same 24 hours, they are going to be fictitious people. So I think that's a fair projection to make. You'd have to canvass all the rest to be sure, but I think that's fair to say. So along those lines, I was thinking, all right, so we've got these fictitious people, but the law says you have to have a signature on a piece of paper that's effectively a legally binding affidavit where you acknowledge that by asking to be registered as a voter, that you are legally qualified to be a voter, and you are not legally prohibited from being a voter, and that you are who you say you are and you live where you say you live, right? So that's an affidavit. It's got to have a signature. So I was wondering, what did the signatures look like for these fake people, right? So New York Citizens Audit asked the various New York City counties involved that had the largest numbers of these kinds of records for the signature cards or the registration applications, and the city refused to hand them over. But they also asked in some smaller districts who did hand them over, and when I took a look at those, we're talking photographically identical signatures, meaning they weren't made by the same person at 2 different times and locations. They were literally the same signature copied digitally and applied to different records that had different ID numbers on them. So that's according to the police I talked to, that is literally forgery. So I was finding that what they were doing is they were explaining these fraudulent records as with forged documents. So the point of saying that is, I find one thing, which is excess records. And I think, boy, it sure would be useful to be able to identify which are which. And then I find the algorithm which would actually do that. And then I'm like, well, I wonder how they made these records in the first place, because you have to have a signature. Gee, let's ask for those signatures and see what we get. And they're all forgeries. And I assumed, to begin with, they were either going to not respond, that is to say, not give it to us, because obviously they don't want to disclose the fact that that they don't have anything, or they would say that they don't have anything, even if they did, because what they did have would show that they shouldn't have anything because they're forged, or they'd hand over forgeries. They didn't really have any other options, and the one that they picked was one of the ones that was on the list. So the date correspondence with the guy in Florida from Venezuela and the introduction of the algorithms is curious. I don't think it's as strong as some of these other things I've just mentioned to you, but it's certainly something that's worth looking at.
This is it's incredible stuff, and I'm just in here thinking, how does somebody roll all of this out? Like what does the public do when they learn this? I mean, the word outrage, I don't even think gets close to what they're going to feel here. I mean, Emerald Robinson is now reporting. She's reporting that this is going on in 72 other countries. She's also reporting that that this has gone on for a long time. I mean, it could have started in 2004, but one of her latest tweets from yesterday says that the communist dictator of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, rigged the 2008 Iowa Democratic presidential caucuses on January 3rd, 2008 for Barack Obama, according to whistleblower testimony from ex-Smartmatic employees now in federal custody. And so, I mean, with the 11 months in the Trump administration, I've been, it's no secret, this audience knows, I've been very disappointed with the lack of arrests over the color revolution that this country's, the attempted color revolution that's been going on, framing Donald Trump for treason, everything else, you name it. And I'm just thinking, this reporting, if true, I mean, people have got to know, and people have got to go to jail. Do you have any confidence? Do you have any confidence that that's going to happen, that we're going to see actual accountability here, Andrew?
I do. Well, let's put it another way. I have confidence that the Trump administration definitely wants accountability and is doing everything they can to achieve it. But it's hard to know what the enemy is going to do. It's one thing to have Gary Kasparov going into a game of chess thinking he's going to win because he knows what he's doing and he's a grandmaster at chess. It's another thing when he's going up against another grandmaster. You're not exactly sure what that guy's going to do. It may be. So I assume that Trump is going to get what he needs. And that's because his team is obviously motivated and he's obviously motivated. There's a couple of things that are, I would say, observations anyone else could make. It doesn't have to be me. But the fact that guy put a portrait of himself immediately after the Butler assassination attempt with a bleeding ear right outside the Oval Office, and then replaced the Biden portrait with the auto pen, those two things alone tell me he is not forgetting this. He's telling every single Democrat who walks into his office, you guys led to this assassination attempt. I find you guilty of that. And I'm not forgetting it. You are either going to help me and redeem yourselves, or you're going to be on the other end of justice. And the thing with the auto pen is I think it just speaks for itself, especially in the context of recent things that he's done. But the ramping up of interest in election integrity is very real. It's not something that I saw during the Biden years. And it's actually of a different quality too, because when I got contacted to talk about this stuff, while Biden was still supposedly our president, it was normally by people who wanted to see a specific election overturned. They were thinking, well, this couldn't have been the real result. And they might have been right. In a lot of cases, I agreed with them. But the way our election laws are written, it's very hard to go backwards that way. It's much easier to just say, going forward, we're going to do this right. Which is why, by the way, I feel that I wrote this paper called System Reliability Analysis that I presented at a cyber warfare conference in Williamsburg, Virginia, earlier this year. And that basically lays out the case that for very obvious reasons, you cannot trust our voter rolls at all. They're just worthless. And I would say somebody else who's been studying the tabulators could make the exact same argument. You can't trust this type of machine, and you can't trust this kind of software. So you have to come up with something different. And that something different is essentially what Jeff O'Donnell, as the Lone Raccoon, was recommending, is that you have all paper counting. And I would say you have to do something about these voter rolls. And I do not mean a simple, a cleanup like they always say. They'll say, oh, we'll get rid of a few, thousand voters to appease these guys. And then at the same time they get rid of 2,000 voters or 10,000 or 200,000, they add 200,000. I actually looked into that a little while ago because Judicial Watch had sued the city of New York for having all these excess records on the rolls. And they entered into an agreement in February of that year, which I think was 2023, and in which the city said, okay, we deleted these records. So I happened to have snapshots on either side of when they said they deleted the records. And someone I knew ran those for me and told me, well, as far as I can tell, they might have deleted some, but they certainly didn't delete as many as they said they did. And they also had a whole bunch added that basically replaced the ones that got deleted. So I would say that those kind of remedies just aren't going to work. Bottom line, machines aren't trustworthy, and neither are the voter rolls. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. You said something about how we don't know what the enemy is going to do in this situation, right? And I think what's obvious to me with all of these scandals, this one being one that just goes back 20 years, if true, if it was in 2024 or 2004, is that there are the deep state's real, the intel oligarchy's real. There's people that don't want this. There's people within the Trump administration that don't want accountability on all these. It's certainly not this one. And the reason that comes up, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this, I mean, this isn't just Democrats. I mean, I can think of countless primaries between the Republicans and and in red states in particular, your primary is where that's actually the general election, right? Where you have a more conservative candidate challenging the rhino. And I've thought of countless, I can think of countless times, just somebody who's been doing this for a long time, where you think, I just don't understand how the rhino was able to overcome. He was able to win this out. And so I have a very good feeling that the GOP, there's GOP senators and congressmen right now, and it may be unbeknownst to them, but they have probably benefited from the rigging of elections via the voter rolls or the machines. What do you think about that? I
agree with you completely. I think that has happened. I think it's happened a lot. I think it's happened over many, many years, probably decades, just like you said. However, I look at that problem as so serious, so widespread, and so intractable that it becomes the equivalent of a hurricane that's run through a town and has essentially blended 500 houses into one. And then having the owners go up to that pile and say, okay, now we have to pull out the parts that belong to our individual houses to rebuild. In that case, you can't do it. It's just too complicated. It would take too much time. It's just a lost leader. Not a lost leader. It's just you take the loss, you take the insurance money, and you rebuild somewhere else. And you just throw away all that scrap. And that's how I look at this situation. It's the problem, if it is as you describe, and as I suspect may be the case, it affects too many people over too much time to ever untangle it properly. So I think that any effort to try and untangle it is not going to be worth the time and money spent on it. I think it would be much better to spend those resources making sure that everything's honest going forward. Sure, if you can identify the people who caused the problem, those guys definitely should be prosecuted. And as far as I'm concerned, it's among the worst kinds of treason you can actually commit. Yeah. I mean, if you can control an election, you have done the exact equivalent of declaring war on your own country.
Yes.
And not only that, successfully taking it over. Okay. So how do you treat someone who has conquered your country after you've conquered it back? You don't give them a pat on the hand and $10 and a gift certificate for Arby's. You put them in jail forever.
Yeah.
And that's what needs to happen here as well. And that, by the way, is one of the issues that the Trump administration has to deal with, because the people who did this, again, assuming that all of our hypotheses are correct, and I actually think they largely are, the people on the other end of that know for sure that they committed death penalty crimes. Okay. So from their point of view, they've got absolutely nothing to lose in how they defend themselves, which means they're going to be very desperate and very dangerous. That's the thing that the Trump administration has to deal with. That's not something that you should take lightly. And personally, if you ever want to go into any kind of a conflict, whether it's in a courtroom or on a battlefield or anywhere else, a boardroom, whatever, you don't want to go in assuming victory because you have so much confidence in yourself. You should always be paying attention to how dangerous and committed your opponent might be and how tricky they might be, because so that you can always remain aware of exactly what they might do so that you can counter it. If you go in overconfident, it hurts your chances for success. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I agree with your analogy about a hurricane blending everybody's homes together. Yeah, I think it would be very difficult to sort that out. But yeah, you do have to have the accountability, because if you don't have the accountability for the people that are responsible for this, that have committed these death penalty crimes, you're going to have people clamoring for a dictator. I mean, if it ever comes out and it's admitted and then nothing is done about it, that you're going to have a complete cascading failure of the confidence in the system. The last question I have before we go, one more tweet from Emerald Robinson, kind of to this GOP thing. You don't understand why GOP senators suddenly want to investigate the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, over killing a couple of drug runners, because you don't know the Venezuela cartels pay off corrupt members of the GOP too. Now, that aside, question for you: are we about to go to war with Venezuela? Is their involvement in our elections the reason why we have warships off of their coast right now? Is it really about drug runners, or is it about this issue?
It wouldn't surprise me if it was either or both. In fact, that was one of the first thoughts I had when this stuff started coming out from Laura Logan. Well, actually, no, I was thinking about that even earlier, because when the first information about Venezuela's connection to Smartmatic came out, that was through Mike Lindell and his operation a couple of years ago. And when I read that, I was thinking, wait a minute. So we've got Venezuelan software in American machines, or American elections, and that software was used to control elections in Venezuela. So who's to say it's not being used to control elections here? And meanwhile, we've got a number of states who we're fairly certain the officials have been taking money from these narco traffickers in order to get their smugglers across our border, like in Arizona and Texas and places like that. So it seemed to me that the chances were in favor of the idea that Venezuela was interfering in our elections, and that would warrant a very strong response. Of course, that wasn't going to happen in the Biden years, but now that Trump's president, it makes sense that he would do that. On the other hand, the drug running alone is enough reason to do that. I've actually wondered why American presidents haven't sent warplanes down to all of Central and South America a long time ago to wipe out the drug runners. Because as far as I'm concerned, killing tens or hundreds of thousands of Americans every year with these drug abuse types of problems was certainly sufficient to justify going to war with them. But apparently our presidents have either been more gentle in their reaction to that than I am, or maybe they were all paid off by these narco traffickers.
I'm about to say that the American deaths is the feature, not the flaw of the plan. It's kind of been a proxy war. The Uniparty, the Intel oligarchy, they've been using the drug runners to effectively go to war with their own citizens, which goes right in line with also taking away our right to vote, because that's fundamentally what we're talking about here. If the algorithms and the voter rolls and the machines and all of it is just fake. And again, it's really the difference between being free and being a slave. Your website is zarkfiles.substack.com. That's ZARK files.substack.com. Dr. Andrew Paquette, I really appreciate it, sir. Let's keep in touch this time. Let's not let it be a year. And if there's any new developments, you have an open invitation to come on. Thank you, by the way, and God bless you for this work that you're doing. This information is vital. It's got to get out to more people. And so I really appreciate you coming on the program, and I really want to do it again soon.
Not a problem. My pleasure, and you have a good night.
All right, you too. Folks, that's all the time that we have for this edition of the show. We're going to be back here tomorrow. I think Rob and Eric will be back tomorrow. Rob was supposed to be here, but he was providentially hindered. I want to shout out to our sponsors. We want to thank Red Vive Health. We want to thank New Horizon Real Estate, Gateway Sight and Sounds, T-Guard, Bail Bonds, and Sherrod Chiropractic. God bless everybody out there watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.